Hello and welcome to Back to the Science. I'm Dr. Susan Oliver and I'm a scientist. Now, you may have heard a few people talking on YouTube and Twitter and elsewhere about some new analysis that has been done on people who have been vaccinated in Florida. Well, I've just had a look at it and it's fantastic news. The data shows that there is no increase in mortality following vaccination in any age group, which is wonderful, right? Of course, we already knew this because numerous studies have been done previously, but it's great to see yet another study confirming it. Strangely enough, a lot of people discussing the study aren't talking about these amazing results. Instead, they've chosen to look at a small subgroup analysis, which doesn't show such positive results. Now, I'm not sure if they are just being negative Nellies or if they have worked out that they get a lot more views, etc., on YouTube and Twitter if they spread negative information about vaccines. But anyway, let's go back to the science and have a look at the study. So this is the study. It's called Exploring the Relationship Between All-Cause and Cardiac-Related Mortality Following COVID Vaccination or Infection in Florida Residents, a self-controlled case series study. Now, it isn't actually peer-reviewed. We don't know who the authors are, and it's a bit light on detail. But as I said, it does show some very positive results. And these are the results here. As you can see, for every age group, there was a decrease in mortality following COVID vaccination. In some cases, it was only a numerical decrease in mortality and it wasn't statistically significant. But for the over 60 age group, there was actually a statistically significant decrease in mortality following vaccination, which, as I said, is fantastic news. And just to be clear, when they talk about all-cause mortality, they have excluded COVID deaths as well as non-natural causes of death like accident and murder. But as I said, most people aren't talking about these great results. They are instead talking about the results of a subgroup analysis. So let's have a look at that. What everyone is talking about is this. If you just look at males 18 to 39 and just look at what they call cardiac-related deaths, there is an 84% increase following vaccination, which means an extra 9 deaths over the 1 year study period for this type of death. Now, of course, this increase was completely offset by an even larger decrease in non-cardiac mortality over the same time period. So the net effect is no increase in mortality in this age group, as I previously showed. Nevertheless, the Surgeon General in Florida is no longer recommending mRNA vaccines for males 18 to 39, which is a bit weird given there was no increase in mortality in this age group. What makes it even weirder is that if we look at the CDC COVID death data for Florida, we see that there had been 1,704 deaths from COVID in males 18 to 39 years old in Florida up to the 10th of January 2022, which is rather a lot more than the extra 9 deaths defined as cardiac-related following vaccination. Why would you be concerned about 9 men dying but not be concerned about 1,704 men dying? Speaking of weird, you may be thinking that it's a bit weird that this subgroup would have an increase in what they define as cardiac-related mortality, while at the same time having a decrease in non-cardiac related mortality. So let's have a look at a few possible reasons for this. But before we do that, let's have a quick look at the methodology that they used. They use what is known as the self-controlled case series method, which is a study design where individuals act as their own control. In this case, they compared mortality within the first 28 days following the last dose of vaccine with mortality for the next 21 weeks. The idea is that if there is a problem from the vaccines, it is going to show up in increased mortality directly following the vaccine. Okay, so let's look at some possible causes for what we are seeing. Firstly, they mention in the paper that they didn't have any data on whether people enrolled in the study had tested positive for COVID, unless it was specifically mentioned on the death certificate. Therefore, it's possible that the increase in what they call cardiac-related mortality is actually an increase caused by COVID, which is known to cause an increase in cardiac mortality. And I will show you some data on that later in the video. The reason this is a possibility is that we know that you have no protection at all against COVID for the first 14 days following initial vaccination. The second potential reason for the weird findings is that it's just an anomaly, and this is an example of p-hacking or data dredging. Now, I've covered this before in a video, but p-hacking or data dredging occurs when researchers collect or select data or statistical analyses until non-significant results become significant. In other words, if their original analysis doesn't show any statistically significant differences between data, they keep analysing different subsets until they find something that is significant. And if you do this enough times, you will always find some significant difference by chance. The final possibility is misclassification of deaths. As I'm sure you all know, myocarditis and pericarditis are rare adverse events that can occur after vaccination with mRNA vaccines, and the incidence is higher in young men. So it is possible that a pathologist doing an autopsy would be more likely to check for signs of myocarditis if the patient is a young male who has been recently vaccinated. The paper listed the following limitations. This study cannot determine the causative nature of a participant's death. We use death certificates data and not medical records. COVID testing status was unknown for those who did not die of/with COVID. Cardiac-related deaths were ascertained if an ACME code of I3 to I52, that's actually a typo, it should be I30 to I52, were on their death certificates. Thus, the underlying cause of death may not be cardiac-related. Which means, for example, if someone died of cancer, but the pathologist decided to do a test for troponin levels and found them elevated, they could add mild myocarditis to the death certificate as another condition, even though it wasn't the primary cause of death, and troponin levels can actually be elevated after intense exercise. The death would then be recorded as a cardiac death in the study, even though it wasn't. And this would, of course, explain why the cardiac-related mortality increased, but non-cardiac-related mortality decreased. Another important point to note is that although the report refers to cardiac-related deaths, it doesn't actually include all of them. They have only included deaths with codes I30 to I52, which is other forms of heart disease. But it doesn't include codes I20 to I25, which includes myocardial infarction or heart attack and many other heart conditions. The codes I30 to I52 do include myocarditis and pericarditis, but they also include some conditions that couldn't possibly be vaccine-related, like valvular disease. The code also includes a condition that is often the final cause of death, even in people without cardiac conditions. namely cardiac arrest, which basically means the heart stops beating. Now, there are lots of other issues with the paper that other scientists have mentioned, like the fact that they didn't remove people from the sample after they died, which automatically skews the data in favour of the baseline period. But in some ways, this doesn't matter that much because even with this, they still don't show any increase in mortality in any age group following the vaccine. An interesting thing I noticed when I was reading the paper was the description of Table 1, which says relative incidence following COVID-19 vaccination or infection for all-cause and cardiac-related deaths during the risk period versus baseline period. Note it says or infection. This suggests that they were planning on including data following infection as well, but for some reason decided to leave it out. Given we don't know who the authors are, we can't actually ask. Another interesting thing is the authors reference another study as an example of the methodology that they have used, but they don't discuss the results of that study and compare them with what their study found. So let's do it for them. This is a study. It's called Risk of Death Following SARS-CoV-2 Infection or COVID-19 Vaccination in Young People in England, a self-controlled case series study. It's still a preprint, but we at least know who the authors are. They are from the Office of National Statistics, the University of Leicester, and University College London. In this study, they just looked at people aged 12 to 29, and they looked at both mortality following vaccination and mortality following infection. This chart shows the relative incidence of death following vaccination for both cardiac-related mortality and all-cause mortality. And as you can see, there is no increase in either during the first 6 weeks following vaccination, which is in direct contrast to the data from Florida, which showed an increase in cardiac-related mortality, but not all-cause mortality. One interesting thing that you may have noticed is that there is a significant decrease in all-cause mortality in the first week following vaccination. This is not some magic vaccine effect. It's what's known as the healthy vaccinee effect. Basically, people put off getting vaccinated if they are ill, which means they are less likely to die just after they've had a vaccine. They also did a number of subgroup analyses, including by vaccine type, by age, by which dose it was, and by sex. And in every case, there was no increase in either cardiac-related mortality or all-cause mortality. So that's after vaccination, but what about after SARS-CoV-2 infection? Let's have a look. This figure here shows the relative incidence of death after SARS-CoV-2 infection. And as you can see, the data are not good. In the first 6 weeks following infection, there was a 600% increase in cardiac-related mortality and a 442% increase in all-cause mortality. And remember, these are young people aged 12 to 29. So in summary, both the Florida and the English data clearly show that there is no increase in mortality following vaccination, but there is a substantial increase in mortality following SARS-CoV-2 infection, even for younger age groups. If you'd like to look further into the data that I've presented, I've provided links in the video's description. And please remember this video is about the science, but you shouldn't take it as medical advice. For that, you should speak to your medical practitioner. If you've got this far, thank you for listening. And if you've liked or commented on the video, double thank you, because that helps the algorithm and means that more people will see the video. And of course, thank you to everyone who has bought me a coffee. I really appreciate your support. I'll be continuing to make videos about the science in the future, so if you'd like to see them, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you.